I remember the day the snow sang to me. It was not a song of wind or ice, not the keening that crawls through the ribs of the dead when a blizzard blots out the world. It was the other song, the low call that thrummed up from the glacier, from the throne, from the one who had broken me and remade me and given me purpose colder than marrow. It said, "Rise, Anub'arak, your king returns to the roof of the world. Guide him through the grave. Listen closely, little warm thing at the edge of the fire. I will give you the journey as I lived it, through stone and frozen sea, under the crushed domes of a fallen empire, in the shadow of a crown of knives. I am Anub'arak of Azjol-Nerub, once a king beneath the tundra, now a crypt lord in service to frost and will. You will walk beside my many legs and see what your living eyes were never meant to see. Do not look away when the light fades. It always fades. We begin not in the north, but in the rot-sweet halls of Lordaeron, where the human prince, Arthas Menethil, my master, learned what it means to gnaw on the bone of a dying god. You could taste it in the air, the scourge's power ebbing like a tide that had pulled too far from shore. Between the flagstones, damp weeds curled. Out in the courtyards, carrion birds argued on broken statues. And in the colonnades, demons, dread lords, left behind like thorns under the skin, ruled over the carcass of a kingdom. Veramathras, Deatharock, Balnazar, their names were old smoke in old rooms. They were parasites, bickering over a corpse. The prince walked those halls as if they were a map he had drawn in blood, his sword. Your stories call it Frostmourne. Dragged a sound across the floor like a finger on glass, though he held it clear of stone. The blade whispers to those who carry it. He listened. He did not smile. He never smiled when he was hungry, and he was always hungry. You want glamour and banners? You will find none here. You want the truth? Good. He was weaker than he pretended. The throne was calling him home because it was failing. The leash that bound the scourge to the Lich King frayed, and every servant with an ounce of will looked up from their misery to consider rebellion. One warden in particular, Sylvanas, went from whisper to knife with a speed that would have pleased me in life. She lured the prince beneath ruined vaults with the promise of parley and laid ambush upon ambush, a poisoned arrow, a cage of banshees, a circle of hatred pulled tight like a noose. He ripped free, not with grace, but with a brutal insistence that made the air itself choose sides. That is Arthas. He does not move around the problem. He pushes until the world cracks. We left Lordaeron like a fever, breaking in sweat. The prince shedding friends and enemies both. The demon lords scavenged each other. The Banshee Queen claimed her freedom and her city. I felt her decision like a knife placed precisely under the sternum. Cold, correct, surgical. She would be relevant later, but not to this path. Our path bent north, north, always north, as if the compass needle were a shard of the throne itself. The ports were stained with oil and ash. The ships were tired and hateful. The sea accepted us without ceremony. Northrend rose like a knife from the water. There is a moment when the light changes, and you know you have left the lands of men. The snow there is not white. It is blue like an old bruise. The sky hangs low, a lid on an eye that watches but never blinks. The first wind that touches your face will take something from you. Your breath, your warmth, your name, and never give it back. That is the tax of the North. He did not flinch. On the first night, we camped beneath a rib of ice that arched like the back of a sleeping god. The dead do not require sleep, only stillness. The living pretended to rest, which is to say they shook in their bedrolls and fed the fires as if flames could frighten away an idea. I curled my carapace against the wind, Every plate of chitin sang softly as the gale worried at the seams. Arthas stood alone, his hair a banner of ash, his breath a metronome. He stared at the glacier the way a diver stares down a black well. Not with fear, but calculation. How deep? How fast? How much will it take from me? I did not announce myself to him the first time I watched him in the white. I was still below. At the edges of the empire I had failed to save. Azjol-Nerub lies in layers, a city built in 1,000 spirals, galleries woven like spider silk across chasms where even darkness has the courtesy to echo. Once merchants brought bright coins and brighter cloth. Once scholars wrote on plates of hammered metal, their glyphs small and neat. Once my daughters learned the songs that coordinate 10,000 legs in a single living bridge. It took the Lich King a season to break us. We fought from pillar to pillar, room to room, the way the living fight when they believe their gods are watching. Perhaps they were. If they watched, they were very quiet. When I rose again, I did not rise alone. My captains, my courtiers, the common soldiers who had trusted my rule, all stood beside me, lacquered in the same unlight. But only I was asked to guide the prince. It was not a request. It was a reminder that a king whose throne is shattered is simply a guide with better posture. He saw me on the second day, after we had left blood on the snow from the living who had survived the first campaign, and the dwarves who mined where they should not have mined. Arthas carved a path through them without hate, which is worse than hate. Hate burns bright and short. His purpose was a glacier. "You are the one they called the Traitor King," he said, when I came up among the ruined ice pillars, voice steady, eyes a blade's width too bright. "I am the one they called King," I said. "The traitor part was added by those who survived me, which is the right of the living. I will show you the road your feet can survive. You serve the throne. I serve inevitability. Then you serve me," he said, and there was no arrogance in it, only geometry. Of course. We hunted a dragon together, because Northrend is not content to be merely a setting. It insists on being a character. Sapphiron was a great blue serpent, whose wings shook loose snow from mountains a day's walk away, whose breath could crystallize a man mid-scream. He drank the sky as he wheeled. He wrote his name in frost across the air. The prince brought him down on the fourth pass, going for the wing joint, where the thin blue hides stretch between finger bones. He learned fast. He coveted faster. When the dragon fell, it fell like a continent. We stood at the edge of the crater and listened to the last sounds of a life too large to be contained by a single death. Arthas raised Sapphiron with an efficiency bordering on tenderness. Even in undeath, the beast was beautiful, in the way a blade is beautiful, pure, functional, unconcerned with mercy. Why am I telling you this? Because it was the first time I saw him look at something and think, "Mine, that belongs to me." And the throne did not whisper dissent. The chain from blade to mind to crown was still firm then. It would not be for long. The surface routes to Icecrown were watched and warded, and more important, they were for the living. The true path ran under the world. I led him to the mouths of my city, half buried in pressure and time, marked by spires that had once been spindly and elegant and now leaned like rotted teeth. The wind did not sing there. It hissed. The dead do not hesitate. It is one of our few advantages. We went down. Azjol-Nerub welcomed us with the kindness of a tomb. You can smell age, even when you cannot breathe. The weight of centuries walks on its own legs. We moved through markets that had been abandoned mid-gesture, goods still arrayed on low platforms, coins trapped in a net of rhyme. In audience halls where I had once held judgment, frost hung from the arches like stilled rain. My court was there, arranged as I had arranged them, out of habit, out of respect, out of cruelty. I do not know. Their carapaces had cracked in the cold and spilled silence. I named each one as we passed, not aloud. Names are intimate things, and Arthas is a jealous god. But I set a claw to the stone whenever we crossed a threshold that mattered. The sound traveled down into dark. The prince did not hurry. He is patient when patience is a weapon. He asked questions that showed he had studied my home as if it were an enemy fortification. Choke points, kill boxes, the load-bearing pillars that made a bridge a trap. The dead can be teacher and textbook if you sharpen your attention. He cut away every unnecessary movement with the same economy he would later apply to flesh. We were not alone, of course. There are things below that do not care who rules above. The Nerubians have always whispered about the deep rooms and the older tenants. Faceless things that wear hunger like a cloak. Thoughts that flutter like broken lamps beneath the sea. I had kept them at the edges in my reign, with geometry and ritual, and the practical application of spears. The Lich King kept them out with cold. Now the cold faltered, and the forgotten remembered their own names. They came up from the deepest pits in waves that slid along walls and made the air feel like damp cloth over the mouth. Your mind survives them by leaning into discipline. My prince survived them by leaning into the sword. In the galleries called the Moonlit Stair, do not ask me why. Names survive their reasons. We fought something that had eyes in places eyes do not belong. It pressed pleasure and panic against the underside of thought, the way a tongue presses a wound. Arthur staggered once, only once, and then was still. When he moved again, it was with a violence so controlled, it looked like calm. He cut its attention into pieces. The thing collapsed into a geometry that did not make sense. And then we were stepping through the pieces as if through a bad dream that was already forgetting us. The dead stared from the walls, my dead, and I was grateful that most of them had no eyes. He asked me, later, as we crossed the narrow stone that most called the bride's spine. Long story. Too long for now. What it had cost to hold a city in the dark. Everything? I said. And was it worth the cost? It was the cost, I said. And he accepted that, because he understands the kind of answers that end questions. You want the scene everyone remembers. You want gates and towers of ice like spears held by giants. You want the enemy prince in moonlit armor, a weapon from a different kind of doom. You want a duel at the foot of a mountain where the air does not move, and pride is the only fire that casts heat. Fine, we will get there, but to understand it, you must understand the crawl through the veins of the world, the slow ascent through rooms where history has been slain and stacked like firewood. By the time we reached the light again, it was not relief. It was an X-ray. The glacier showed us our bones. Above us, the crown of the world, Icecrown. Its spires an argument with gravity. Its ramparts, the ribs of a dead god, wired and wired again with iron. Around its base, obelisks of black ice, savage and precise, driven into the bedrock at angles that would make a mathematician pray. Illidan's work, the betrayer, had returned with Naga and the Blood Prince's host, and their magic chewed at the locks that held the throne shut. You could feel the pattern under your feet, a hum like the throb in a tooth before it abscesses. The Lich King's will flickered. The scourge wavered. I felt my leash slip and tighten, and I confess this to you because I have confessed it to no one else. The tiny looseness felt like air. Arthas tasted it too. Weakness on high, opposition at the gate, time a narrowing throat. He made decisions fast, not because he trusted luck, but because he trusted momentum. He is a falling blade, He is a thrown spear. Stop him early or you will meet him at your heart. We moved. Sapphiron howled above us and shook hail from the sky. Ghouls ran like wolves. Abominations smiled because they cannot do anything else. I walked point on paths I had laid a lifetime ago and a death ago. And every step under the starless sky felt like the last thought of a man drowning. Illidan does not waste time with subtlety. He had carved the land into sigils that bent light, had arranged his forces with a gambler's confidence, had brought with him a prince who had already chosen to live in the shadow of another's doom. I respect that in a man. It makes him predictable in the ways that matter. Kael'thas fought like a storm trapped in a bell. His mages tore holes in the air and filled them with screaming glass. Lady Vashti's Naga boiled up out of meltwater like punctuation marks in the wrong language. They wanted the throne undone, the crown cracked, the leash broken. You see the irony, yes? The jailers and the jailed wanted the same thing, for different appetites. We cut through them the way water finds a flaw in rock. Not with superiority, we bled, nor with grace. We are not graceful things, but with persistence. You cannot convince winter to be less cold. You can only survive it longer than the next man. Arthas did not seek their leaders first. He sought the levers of their plan, the obelisks, the runic anchors, the high ground that was not truly high, because the glacier does not acknowledge your maps. While we pulled out the nails, they hammered in new ones. While they set wards to bind the throne's doors, we set teeth to tear them out. You cannot imagine how loud magic is when it is no longer sure of itself. By the time the two of them faced each other, the air was full of iron filings. Illidan's blindfold was not for show. He sees the world in wounds, and the world was bleeding. Arthas climbed to meet him on a platform of ice that jutted out into a stupidity of space. I did not follow him to that last step. No one did. Some distances belong to kings. If you want taunts, oaths, poetry, you will be disappointed. They did not flirt with fate. They measured. Illidan uncoiled like a spring and came in fast, because fast was his ally, and the throne is slow. Arthas took the first strike on the flat of his blade and gave ground the way a glacier gives ground, with the promise that it will take it back, slowly, completely, forever. There are fights that are performance, and there are fights that are solution. This was the latter. They moved through forms so old they had forgotten who had named them. Frost steamed where it met fell. The ice under their feet cracked in a map of futures that would not be. Arthas fell once, and the sound it made in me was not fear, not exactly. It was the sensation of a door swinging on a hinge that has been there for 1,000 years and may suddenly decide to tear out of the frame. Illidan pressed, because of course he did, and for an instant the north held its breath. Then Arthas twisted, not with strength, but with the kind of leverage that comes from understanding exactly how much of yourself you can afford to break. Frostmourne sang. No, not sang. Sang is warm. It screamed like wind through a ruin, and suddenly Illidan's momentum became a rope around his own throat. The blade found what it had come for. After that, there is no poetry. The betrayer fell, and the ice took him like a final verdict. The throne's voice came then, not as a shout, not as a whisper, but as a pressure. Here, now, come home. We made a path through the last of the defenses. I say we, out of habit and loyalty. The truth is simpler. We were the tide line. He was the wave. The doors of frozen memory, the locks of carved winter. One by one, the geometries that had baffled enemies and reassured servants opened at his approach. He climbed stairs that no living foot was meant to climb. I followed to the lip of the sanctum and no further, because I know my place in the story. Every king must learn where to stop. Inside the throne was a flower of knives. The air did not move. The crown sat upon the skull of what you would call a man, and what I will call a decision. Ner'zhul's eyes were not eyes anymore. They were directions. Arthas approached as one would approach an altar that was also a cliff. He raised his sword. For a heartbeat, you could imagine a different end. A rejection, a cutting free, a refusal to be the sum of 1,000 bad choices. Then he brought the blade down. The helm split the world between before and after. When he set the crown upon his head, something set the crown upon all our heads. Now, he said, in a voice that was two voices braided into a single whip. I see. Understand me. I have ruled. I know the difference between power that is worn and power that wears you. The new king was not a man in a chair. He was a chair that had found a man sturdy enough to hold it a while. His gaze moved over us and pinned us like insects to a scholar's page. Anub'arak, he said, and my name sounded like the skeleton of a word. My king, I said, and the old muscle of the phrase flexed easily. We are whole, he said. The world will learn what that means. The leash tightened again. The momentary slack that had felt like air became a garrote, pulled just shy of murder. I do not flatter myself to say he noticed my thought. He noticed every thought. When the throne is not fraying, the scourge does not think alone. You talk of free will as if it is a coin you can keep in your pocket. Up here, your pockets freeze and tear. You want a clean ending. I cannot give you one. The dead do not end. They are repurposed. The prince who had come up through my city with the patience of a flood and the rage of a winter storm sat down on a seat designed to use men like marrow. His first orders were efficient, brutal, necessary. Consolidate, reclaim. Remind the world that cold is not an absence of heat, but a presence in its own right. I took those orders into the bones of my army and translated them as I had translated 1,000 laws in life. Into angles, into columns, into the music of coordinated legs. That night, if night has meaning at the pole, I returned alone to the edge of the underways. The wind combed my spines. Azjol-Nerub breathed on me from below like a lover dying. I thought of the first roads I had commissioned, the first vaults I had carved to keep our stories safe from time and from flood. I thought of the last looks of the last soldiers who had trusted that my calculations would protect them. Kingship is a ledger you balance with lives. I looked up at the throne and saw a new sort of arithmetic. Frosta was units, hunger as sum, silence as solution. Do I regret? It is a word for warm bloods. What I have is a list. On that list is everything I have done and everything I will do. When you live long enough under the glacier, you learn that lists are not for judgment. They are for remembering, and what I remember most sharply, sharper than the first bite of snow on my antennae, sharper than the sizzle of feel where it hits ice, is the moment in the tunnels when the walls themselves leaned in to listen to a boy with a broken god calling him home. He listened back. He agreed. You will ask if he could have chosen otherwise. That is the question you always ask. We choose every step. Until we are somewhere, choice is no longer a relevant tool. Was the throne inevitable? Was his fall inevitable? Was my service? We are insects and men under a sky that does not care for either. The glacier makes promises in the language of pressure. It keeps them all. I will give you this then, because you have been kind enough not to interrupt. There was a moment, small, private, unnoticed, when we were moving between two rooms named for poets, long dead. Frost had made lace across a mural of the Empire at its height. 10,000 of my people in a procession of silk and bronze, bearing lamps whose flames were eyes, crossing a bridge that curves away into light. Arthas paused, only for a breath, and the hand that held his sword moved, only a fraction, as if to touch the scene. He did not touch it. He moved on, but the restraint was not the restraint of a machine. It was the restraint of a man who weighs even his luxuries. Remember that when you tell the story. Monsters are lazy explanations. He was not lazy. He took precisely what he chose to take and left everything else to freeze. Above us, the King of Winter sits. He wears a crown with the patience of an avalanche. When he blinks, rarely calculated, the world down here shivers and calls it weather. I am his guide still. I walk where stairs remember feet. I listen where walls remember names. Sometimes the ice sings the song I woke to, and sometimes, if the wind is down and the sky is so clear, it feels hollow. I can hear other music, an old market tune, the rhythm we used to use when crossing a living bridge. I hum it under my breath, not because I expect the dead to learn it, but because even frost remembers the shape of water. You want to know what happened during the Frozen Throne? This. A boy followed the line of his hunger to the top of the world. A fallen king showed him the shortcuts through the grave. Enemies measured blades, and the glacier corrected their math. A crown found a head that would not crack when the cold moved in, and an empire beneath the ice, which had already fallen once, became a road again, because all our greatest works are roads in the end. Roads for someone else to use. Roads to a throne we will never sit upon. Roads to a decision that will not consult us. I am Anub'arak, once a king, now a guide. If you would survive your own winter, listen, pick your pace, accept the cost, and keep your eyes on the shape of the mountain. When you come to a door that is also a knife, choose the way that cuts you into a shape you can still recognize afterward. If you will not do that, then bring a crown strong enough to tell you who you are. The North does not forgive, because forgiveness requires heat. It only remembers, and it remembers everything.